What if I told you that behind the golden domes and peaceful courtyards of the Ottoman Empire, there was a world far more disturbing than most history books will ever reveal? A world not filled with warriors or scholars, but with boys. Boys taken from their homes, dressed in silk, and taught not just how to serve, but how to seduce. They weren't soldiers. They weren't servants. They were male concubines, adored in public, controlled in private, and then quietly forgotten. In the heart of one of the most powerful empires in the world, these young boys weren't hidden in shame. They were displayed, praised, and used as symbols of wealth, influence, and refined taste. This isn't some forgotten rumor or a shadowy tale passed down in secret. This is a true part of history, a history soaked in beauty, power, and pain. But don't let the perfume and poetry fool you. Being loved didn't mean being safe. These boys lived lives full of contradictions, cherished by their masters, yet never free. They were trained to be graceful, talented, and obedient. They had no say in their fate. Their beauty gave them value, and once it faded, so did their worth. While many outsiders might have seen the palace as a place of luxury, for these boys, it was often a gilded prison. They lived under constant watch, their futures decided by others. At any moment, their fortunes could rise or be taken away. And beneath all the silk and gold, the truth remained. They were part of a system built not on love, but control. To understand this hidden world, we have to look beyond the battles, the borders, and the famous sultans carved into textbooks. We need to step inside the palace walls, into rooms no historian ever showed us in school. The Ottoman Empire wasn't just a military machine or a center of learning. It was a complex society where beauty, status, and desire were deeply connected. And at the center of this quiet storm were boys, some as young as 8 or 9, taken from faraway lands, handpicked for their faces, their manners, and the way they moved. They were called Yamaks. These boys weren't just background figures. They were trained in poetry, music, court etiquette, even politics. But beyond the surface-level education was something darker. They were taught how to entertain, how to please, how to make themselves desirable to the powerful men around them. This wasn't accidental. It was an intentional system, one that shaped not only the lives of these boys, but also the emotional and cultural fabric of the empire itself. To outsiders, especially European envoys and diplomats, the practice might have seemed shocking, but within the empire, having a beautiful young companion wasn't seen as strange or inappropriate. In fact, it was often considered a sign of good taste, refinement, and masculinity. The lines we draw today between love and power, between identity and expression, didn't exist the same way back then. Sexuality in the Ottoman world was not about identity. It was about roles. As long as a man held the active, dominant position, his reputation remained untouched. Love between men existed. Affection was real, but so were the risks. Because even inside the palace, even with all its gold and grace, emotions were dangerous. A boy who fell in love with the wrong person could lose everything. This wasn't just about pleasure. It was about politics, prestige, and survival. And it's only by looking closer that we begin to see the full picture. The Ottoman court was more than a seat of power. It was a stage. And the Yamaks, the young boys selected to become male concubines, were among its most carefully crafted performers. They were not taken at random. These boys were chosen for their looks, their charm, and their potential to become something more than servants, objects of admiration, even love. Many were brought from lands conquered by the empire, places like the Balkans, the Caucasus, and North Africa. Others were given as tribute, tokens of diplomacy, or simply purchased by the court. Once they arrived at the palace, their transformation began. They lived in gender-specific quarters, usually under close surveillance. Every aspect of their daily life was shaped to fit the court's idea of beauty and refinement. They were trained in music, dance, literature, and manners. They learned how to entertain powerful men, not just through conversation, but through presence, grace, and submission. It was a slow, careful grooming process, and no part of it was accidental. Venetian diplomat Benedetto Ramberti, who visited the Ottoman court in the 16th century, described seeing as many as 500 boys living within the palace walls. They ranged in age from 8 to 20 and were referred to as the delight of the Lord. These weren't just background figures. They were symbols of power, often paraded during official ceremonies, flaunted as part of the sultan's wealth and taste. But while their beauty gave them status, it also defined their fate. Most Yamaks were not allowed to leave the palace unless they were selected for public office or simply grew too old to be desired. So did their importance. In rare cases, a boy might rise through the ranks and gain real power. But for most, their time in the spotlight was short, and what followed was silence. To the Ottomans, this system wasn't strange. It wasn't even taboo. The empire didn't label people as gay or straight. For centuries, the world of the Yamaks thrived behind high palace walls. It was whispered about, observed with curiosity, and largely accepted within the empire's elite circles. But that acceptance would not last. As the Ottoman Empire began to open its gates to Europe, welcoming ambassadors, traders, and new ideas, something began to shift. It wasn't the buildings or the borders that changed first. It was the culture, the way people thought, the way they judged. Western diplomats brought more than just maps and treaties. They brought new beliefs, especially around morality, sexuality, and public behavior. Ideas that had taken root in Victorian Europe, where anything outside strict, heterosexual marriage was seen as sinful and shameful, began to seep into the Ottoman court. And slowly, what had once been admired became something to hide. By the mid-1800s, this quiet transformation turned into law. In 1858, the Ottoman government introduced a penal code, one that directly punished acts against modesty. Public displays of same-sex affection could now lead to jail time or heavy fines. Though the language was vague, its impact was not. For the first time in centuries, what had once been normalized was now criminalized. The effects were swift and brutal. In Istanbul, men suspected of same-sex relationships were beaten in the streets. Their heads were shaved as a form of humiliation. Some were sexually assaulted by state actors, sending a clear message. This would no longer be tolerated. The Yamaks, once a part of palace culture, began to disappear. Not because the desire had faded, but because the fear had grown too strong. And yet, the empire itself hadn't changed its holy book. The Quran remained the same. So what caused this sudden wave of repression? Historians largely agree it wasn't religion. It was influence. As the Ottomans tried to present themselves as a modern empire, they began to adopt the values of the Western powers they were trying to impress. Among all the stories buried beneath the marble floors of Ottoman palaces, one rises above the rest, not because it was grand or glorious, but because it was deeply human. It's the story of Tahir and Tib, two young men, taken by Christian noblemen in a time when borders were always shifting and loyalty was a dangerous thing. But instead of being brutalized, they were cared for. And in time, love grew, real love. A love that defied religion, nationality, and everything society told them was acceptable. For a while, it seemed like they'd found peace. Their captors weren't cruel. They were affectionate, generous. They built a fragile happiness, one not shaped by fear, but by connection. But the world outside wasn't ready. Neither Christian society nor the Ottoman state could accept what they had. Their relationship was labeled perverse. It didn't matter that it was consensual. It didn't matter that it was pure. It was enough to be different. And for that, they were punished. Tahir and Tib were imprisoned. Their lovers remained behind bars. But what happened next turned their story from tragedy into legend. The noblemen, wealthy Christian captives, refused to give up. They escaped prison, reunited with Tahir and Tib, and in an act of complete devotion, they did something few would ever consider. They converted to Islam, not out of faith, but out of hope. They believed that by becoming part of the Ottoman religion, they could finally live together, freely, without shame. It was bold, it was desperate, and it didn't work. The tide of history had already turned. The old world where such love could live in secret was gone. And though they tried to reclaim it, it was already buried. The courts no longer welcomed their kind of love. Society had changed. The empire had changed. And so, like so many others, their story faded into silence. But it wasn't lost. So now that you've seen inside this hidden world, what do you think? Was the system of the male concubine a strange form of tolerance? Or was it simply another mask, hiding power, control, and pain behind silk and poetry? These are the parts of history we're rarely taught. Stories that don't fit neatly into textbooks or timelines. But they matter because they show us how love, identity, and power have always been tangled together, and how the rules we follow today were shaped by centuries of silence and struggle. Let us know what you think in the comments below. Do you believe love like Tahir and Tib's could have ever survived in a world like that? Or was it doomed from the start? And if you want more untold stories from history's darkest corners, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and join us as we uncover the side of the past most people never see.